Welcome to GibSams Wellbeing at Work podcasts. These are a series of conversations which aim to bring new ideas and perspectives around wellbeing at work. GibSams is a Gibraltar registered charity providing free helpline and chat services for those who may be suffering emotional distress and championing a culture of wellbeing for all. I'm Mary Lou, the founder and chairman of GibSams, and my fellow trustee, Kerstin, will be chatting to the recipients of our Corporate Wellbeing Awards who have very kindly agreed to share how implementing wellbeing measures has resulted in benefits for both employees and their organizations. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome. So this is the first episode of the GibSams podcast. My name is Kerstin Andlaw. I'm leading the Wellbeing at Work initiative at GibSams. And today I have the absolute pleasure to speak to Gordon Paterson from NatWest International Gibraltar about their wellbeing strategy and initiatives, because they have won one of the GibSams Wellbeing Awards back in 2020. So welcome and good morning, Gordon. How are you?
Hi, Kerstin. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast. We were delighted to enter for the Wellbeing Award last year with GibSams, and we're very, very pleased to win an award. And it's great to talk to you today and share some of the things we do around wellbeing and what it means to us and our business.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, thank you for taking the time out to talk to me, and especially since your well-being strategy and the initiatives that you guys implement are, very, very comprehensive. So I'm aware we won't be able to cover all of it. But I'm curious, what was the reason, or what is the underlying theme for NatWest to consider well-being at work?
So if you think about NatWest Group as a whole, then we are a very purpose-led organisation, and our aim is to champion potential and to help people, families and businesses to thrive. And central to that is well-being, the well-being of our colleagues, also the well-being of the community that we operate in, and therefore each and every one of us, family members, business associates, colleagues, it covers everyone across the whole spectrum.
Wow. And so with that in mind, what are some of the strategies or initiatives, or what's your approach towards supporting all these people around well-being? Because it's quite, there's a lot there.
Well, it's a great question, because it's actually quite a wide topic. And when we think about well-being, we break it down under 4 pillars, and that starts to make you think around, what's really important. We think about physical well-being, we think about mental well-being, we think about financial well-being and social well-being, and we can explore any of those that you want to, maybe in a little more detail, but those are the 4 pillars that are really the most important to us. And it starts to make you then think about what's your underlying strategies for each of those, and how do individuals actually feel about those things, because everyone is different, and that is a critical thing to understand. And the aspect of well-being that maybe impacts one colleague or one person in our community may not be the same thing that impacts the person next to them. In fact, it won't be. Everyone's different, but you can start to tease out the subject and understand things like that, and understand people and how they feel better if you start to think about it under those 4 different pillars.
That's very interesting, because yes, I mean, all of those 4 pillars, they affect all of us, but some may affect us more than others depending on our circumstances, but also perhaps on who we are, what our outlook is on life, etc. So how do you, since it is so individual and well-being is really different for everyone, how do you approach it? How do you, move forwards with it?
I think it'd be remiss of us not to use COVID as a great example of how we do that, and some of the things we've maybe done during the COVID period that would maybe help bring it to life a little bit more. So if we think about what happened under COVID, one of the first reactions was everyone was recommended that we have a lockdown and we all work from home, which is a sensible reaction to COVID and to help with reducing the spread of the disease. But actually, once you've done that, and it sounds like a great idea and you've done all that, individuals, and I go back to that word, it's about individuals, we don't all have the same circumstances at home. You know, residential circumstances are different. So some of us will have children running around. Some of us on the complete opposite end of the spectrum will be left potentially isolated on their own.
Yeah.
And some of us will have large houses that we're very fortunate to have, and some of us will be in a very small apartment, and some of those in a very small apartment could be the ones that have families running around as well. So there's a complete mix there. And again, we're bringing out that individual circumstance thing again. Everyone's an individual, everyone's different. So what do you do about that? We've sent everyone home, but actually then you need to check in with people. Then you need to check, so how are they doing? Is it working for them? Do we need to adjust how they operate to accommodate their well-being? You know, and if I think about our wider business, not just Gibraltar, but more widely, we did that to the full extent. And we did find we'd have people who did feel isolated, they were on their own, and their social well-being was impacted. And we had to find a way of actually, they can come back into the office because the well-being has been impacted by what's happening. Similarly, if you're a parent and you've got children in the house and it's maybe not conducive to working, we need to find a way of helping that person back into the office. Or maybe it might be for some of the time, and some of the time they might be at home, and a mix and match. So it's all about individual personal circumstances. And once you've made a decision and done something, you don't just leave it as that. You have to check in with people. You have to check if they're okay. You have to ask them, is it working? And I think initially what we found was that you don't get the real answer the first time you ask the question, because people, certainly with COVID, thought actually it's not going to be for too long. I'll get through, I'll manage, it'll be okay. And actually, as the weeks grew, the months grew, you have to be remembering to keep in check in with people and ask them the question again, because actually, when you get that first reaction, that first response, it might not be the real response, the true answer. So it doesn't do any harm whatsoever. And I think it's one of my learnings through this time we've just experienced. Asking someone the question first, how are you? Particularly when you meet someone, you don't necessarily always get the real answer. What you get, what it's treated as quite often is a form of greeting.
Yes.
Not really a question about how are you. It's almost a form of greeting. So asking the question twice is often a good way of really, do I get the real answer at that point? Because some people, you just don't want to talk about their well-being so much, or give you that as the first answer. So important for us as an employer that we always check in with our people. We will always make sure they're doing okay. And that COVID has been the great example of that. And there's just some examples of, whether it's physical well-being, you're operating in a small environment with children in the house, or whether you're left isolated, and it's a social well-being. These are aspects that have come to the fore through the last kind of number of weeks and months that we've have to respond and react to make sure our colleagues have been looked after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really relate to it because we asked that question, how are you? Or, we just, like I said to you when we came onto this podcast, I said, how are you? But actually really asking, how are you doing? How are things? how things are going for you makes a huge difference. But I'm curious because, you know, NatWest as a whole is a very large organization, and NatWest in Gibraltar is, you know, it's probably one of the biggest banks in Gibraltar. And so when you're saying about, you know, really asking people and really connecting with them and checking in on them, how do you do that so that it actually happens whilst all the other work still takes place? And then how do you support people when there are areas perhaps within those 4 pillars that an individual might have challenges in? How do you fit that in? Is there a way of integrating it? How do you guys go about it?
So in actual fact, even before we came across COVID in 2020, we do regularly have one-to-ones with all our colleagues. All line managers do that on a monthly basis anyway. But within that one-to-one meeting, one of the things we do is ask about well-being and how people are, and that's something we've done for a long time. It's come to the fore through COVID. It's become more prominent, but it was always there. It was always part of the conversation that you had with a colleague, and that's around, you know, we talk about having a great place to work. That's one of the things we try to deliver for colleagues, and that is absolutely one of the parts of it. It's one of the questions we ask of people when we have those one-to-ones. Now, we're very fortunate as a large organisation. We do have access to various resources and tools within our human resources function that we can point people to, and often it's not about having the conversation with the individual and going into the detail of what might be challenging in terms of a colleague's well-being, but it's about understanding if there is a challenge, where we can point that individual in terms of the resources, etc., we have available to them, to get some help. And I'll give you an example of that. We are fortunate to have an app. It's a GP app that we have. All our colleagues have access to it. And actually, through 2020, what we found was 1/3 of colleagues across NatWest Group who had access to the app actually did make use of it, which is a huge number. Whereas before, pre-COVID, it was probably around 5%, whereas it increased up to 1/3 of colleagues. So I think it's about stimulating the person to think about their own well-being, and therefore then go and look for. We're fortunate we've got resources within our group, but there are resources out there. GibSams is a great resource for people. It's getting people to think about their own well-being and what do they want to do or think they need to do about helping themselves, whether it's physical, whether it's social, whatever it is, financial, getting them to realise and think about it themselves, because, you know, you can't provide all the answers, but you can recognise the challenge and try and help push them to think about helping themselves through whatever resources they've got available to them. And it's about sparking that conversation, making people think about it. That's the big thing. You know, you're not going to sit there as potentially a line manager and a colleague and get into the detail of that, because it's probably or possibly not appropriate. But you can help someone appreciate their own position when you see it, and help point them in the right direction. I think. Sorry.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying there, and I think that's probably really also very helpful for some of our listeners, because I think, you know, as an organization or a manager or a leader or a colleague, it can sometimes feel daunting to have a conversation around well-being, because there can sometimes be that fear, or, well, I don't know what to do with that, I can't fix it for them. But as you say, it's just stimulate people to think about their well-being. And then there are a lot of resources, like you have them in-house, but there's also a lot of resources within the community where people can go and get more help, more support, professional support to move forward. So I think that's really valuable. And I think one thing also is something that you said earlier around stimulating people to think about their own well-being. We often have a tendency to just kind of carry on, you know, and as you mentioned earlier with COVID, we thought it's going to be over soon, so we're okay, but actually to really check in and notice what's going on is really important.
Indeed. I think that's absolutely the case. And I think about my own situation personally. I can think back to we were all told, right, we're gonna have to work from home now, and you do that, and you do your lockdown and everything else, and I'll be completely honest with you, the fridge becomes your best friend almost, and I was one of those people who yes, there's some lovely food in there, and oh, there's a bottle of wine or a beer or whatever, so maybe a few COVID pounds go on over the course, and then that, you know, and that builds up over a number of months, and all of a sudden you get the realization actually your physical well-being, and maybe you haven't looked after it, and personally that was something I certainly recognised in myself. You have a bit more lethargic, you're maybe not as sharp, you're maybe not concentrating quite so well, and I made the decision at the start of this year, I need to do something about that. So healthier eating, maybe not so much alcohol intake, exercising, and I'm pleased to say that I started that at the beginning of January. We're now middle of April, towards the end of April, and I have managed to keep those good habits, but it does make a difference, and it's all about physical well-being. One of the pillars we talked about, but it's important, and that's one of the things I've taken from what's been happening recently, and you know, I've applied that to myself, and I feel better for it, and it's definitely worked.
Yeah, it resonates certainly with me, and I'm sure it does with lots of our listeners, you know, having gone through lockdown and those, and I think that the key there is that you know, that balance, because there are different aspects of well-being. You're talking about them in terms of 4 pillars, but the different aspects, there is a balance within them, and sometimes one area goes. And if we have those conversations, and if we continue to, you know, thinking about well-being, we will pick up on that imbalance fairly quickly before it becomes a real big issue. And so that's what I'm really taking from what you're saying, is to not allow something to become a really big problem. It's to continuously have those conversations and checking in with people.
Absolutely, not checking anything. I mean, I did mention within our kind of normal way of approaching this, we do have that conversation within those one-to-one meetings that take place, but that's not always where you pick things up. You know, if you're in a meeting with colleagues, if you're meeting a business colleague, whatever circumstance, you know, how people react in those meetings, or those interactions that you have with them, even if you're standing by the water cooler and having a conversation, if that person's a bit grumpy, it's maybe not just because they're a bit grumpy. There's maybe a reason for that. You know, if they're maybe a bit noisy in a meeting, that's a reaction for some reason. Maybe the opposite end of the scale, maybe they're very quiet. And you can pick these things up when you spend time and you think about well-being more often. People react differently for different reasons and behave differently in different circumstances. If you see that change in behaviour, that's something that should make you think, is that person okay? Should I ask that person now, how are you doing? And then ask them again. Because if they're reacting differently to what they normally react, there's maybe something there that actually, you know what, well, they maybe tell you, and you go, well, go and speak to someone to get professional advice, or can I help you, or here's these other resources you should use, or, you know, you can pick up these things in many different ways in different circumstances, just by people behaving differently, and that's an important thing to think about as well. And, you know, it doesn't need to just be this whole kind of line manager reportee thing either. You know, I've asked my boss, at times in the past, are you okay? How's things going? Because you can see stress levels building, you can see a different reaction. And we can all ask each other that question, whether it's families at home, whether it's work colleagues. We can all ask that question. We can all show an interest in people's well-being and try and help them.
Yeah, I like that, because I think it's such a simple thing that, as you say, we all can do. It's I guess having it on our radar, and really when we're engaging with people, whether that's having a cup of coffee in the tea kitchen, or whether it's in a meeting, or whether it's out and about, it's being fully present so that we notice when someone perhaps is not quite themselves, and we can ask those questions.
Absolutely. And, let's be honest, people at times, they don't like to talk about things, but actually talking about things does help. So
absolutely.
And it doesn't need to be you to speak to, but if you're the one that sparks them to think about, yeah, I should do something about that, I should speak to someone, then you've done a great thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes just having someone ask you, well, really, how are you, feels wonderful to just have that as well. But Gordon, I'm curious, because I know you guys have so many initiatives and resources that you guys use for your people, and but in terms of locally, Gibraltar, what has been perhaps one of the most useful, most used, most valuable service or intervention or initiative that you found was really, really important for people, or is really important for people to have?
I think, and again, I'm going to use COVID or touch on COVID, because I think it's been a real catalyst for some of the conversations we've been having around well-being, and I don't know if you call it a tool or whatever, but just staying connected. And we all get a bit of Zoom fatigue, we all get a bit of that, but actually that act of staying connected, whether it's virtually or whether you can do it physically, because as we sit here today, we are more able to meet again and work in the office, and etc. That act of staying connected is such a powerful one for me, and that's the thing that's resonated most. That actually speaking to each other, making sure we're checking in with each other, and working as a collective, rather than people feeling isolated or left out. That's something we will continue as we go forward, and make sure we don't lose that, because even if you think about the office environment, people probably could feel isolated or on their own, even in an office environment when everyone's there.
Yeah.
But it's that act of staying connected and everyone kind of feeling part of things and not being left out. I think that's, I don't know if it's a tool, I don't know if I've answered your question as you've asked it, but yeah, it's certainly the thing that one of the key things I take away has been really, really important as a result of what we've experienced recently. And yeah, it's a big takeaway.
That is a big takeaway, and I think it's so interesting how you're saying it. It's important to take it forward, because even though we're now, back in the offices again, and we're there physically, we can be physically connected in some way, but still feel isolated. And to really, and you said the act of connecting. I like that, because it's something we do intentionally. We want to make sure we stay connected to people. But so I'm curious, because obviously, for many people this is very obvious, but I think it's always an important point to highlight and understand. Having people more connected, having people more working as a collective, having people with a higher level of well-being, what difference does it make? What's the benefit for the company, for the organization as a whole?
I think it's fair to say if anyone is feeling that their well-being is impaired in some way, they're going to be less happy in what they're doing, and they're going to be distracted, and you're not going to get the best from them. And if you're not getting the best from them, your business is going to suffer as a result. And you can be quite cynical in that as a business leader, and think, well, actually, if I can get the well-being of my people to be higher, better, I'm going to get better performance and out the business, and we're going to all do better. And that's true, but it's not the way I like to think about it. The more important fact is, are your people, your colleagues that you work with, are they doing okay? Are they in a good place? And yes, the side effect may well be that as a business we will perform better, we will do better things together, and that's great. But I would never like to think that that's your primary reason for asking about people's well-being, or how they are, or what they do. It's a helpful side effect. More important to know. Okay.
Yeah, I really like that, because there's something I have observed in my work in the past, is that it's a culture, isn't it? And that we call it culture because it's something we can't really put a word to it. It's something we experience, and there's an atmosphere, it's a connection, it's something we can't put words to it. And when that culture isn't there, but there might be all these wonderful things in place, but the culture isn't there, it somehow doesn't work. And so it really has to be for the, I'm going to call it the right reasons, whether I'm right or not, but it has to come from that place.
Yeah, and it comes back to the whole thing about being kind of purpose-led as an organisation. These are the building blocks. These are the good things you do to look after people. And if you do the right things and behave in the right way, and look after well-being and your colleagues and your etc., then the results follow. That you shouldn't be focused on the result. You should be focused on the building blocks. And one of the building blocks, and we're talking about today, is that well-being of your colleagues, yourself. I touched on my own situation, but think about yourself, think about others, think about how it goes. Yes, you get the positive results out the back of that as a business, but it shouldn't be your principal focus. Your principal focus should just be that building block around the well-being of your colleagues.
Yeah. So focusing on the foundation, and then the empire, the building, the house gets built by itself in a way, if the foundation is there.
You see that culture of how you behave and how you act and how you are, that then feeds the business results in hopefully a positive fashion.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Gordon, I could carry on talking to you, but just to wrap it up, because I know we're running out of time. What would you say to someone just starting out to think about well-being and sort of the culture in their organization, and how they do what they do, which is what you've just covered? What would you say would be a simple, easy way to start of looking at that, making some changes?
I'd probably say three things for that, Kerstin. One is think about around those 4 pillars. Mm-hmm. Think about physical, mental, financial, social. Use that as your building blocks. Use that as your 4 pillars, and a guide for you around when you start to think about well-being, because it can be a complex subject. So think about those 4 pillars. Think about the fact that everyone is different. Every individual is different, and they're all going to have different things going on in their lives, and therefore their well-being will be impacted differently. So you can't treat groups of people the same. Think about each person as an individual. It's important. And then ask the question, and we talked about ask again, how are you? genuinely ask the question with a view of understanding how someone is. And you maybe not have all the answers. You maybe can't help specifically, but you can maybe spark that thought in that person's head to find help somehow, or speak to someone, or just address any kind of challenge that they might have. So that's how I would summarise how I'd start to think about that in your organisation, or how you behave. That would be my tips.
Well, thank you very much for that, because I think it's not only going to be helpful and interesting for people starting out to think about well-being, but also for people that have already been doing it for a long time, and I'm including myself here, is to really just, remind ourselves of those different aspects that create well-being, of the fact that it is very individual, and to ask the question, to look at people and to check in with people to build that connection. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Kerstin. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so thank you for taking the time out, and we'll look forward to carry on working with you guys.
Please, happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of GibSams Wellbeing Podcasts, which I hope you have enjoyed. If you're interested in applying for one of our Wellbeing Recognition Awards, or would like our assistance in implementing a wellbeing strategy and building a culture of well-being at your place of work, please get in touch with us at wellbeing@gibsams.gi. Thank you once again for joining us.